Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. New York. Winter morning. The wind seeped into every crevice of the streets like a thief of heat, icy and indifferent. The skyscrapers, giants of glass and steel, cast their shadows over the hurried passers-by, as if observing human misery from above with silent disdain. The bustle of the city seemed to ignore those on the ground who were simply struggling to survive. On a bench of the Bryant Park, in the partial shelter of a disused kiosk, a man slept, curled up under a threadbare blanket and an old military coat. Caleb Hayes, 54, wore fatigue like a second skin. His weather-beaten face, calloused hands, and ragged breaths bore witness to a long winter of solitude. In the past, he had built warships. High-ranking naval engineer, an MIT graduate, he had led crews at major shipyards from Norfolk to San Diego. He owned a beachfront home, a German car, and an unconditional love for his wife, Mira, who had died of cancer 2 years earlier. Her disappearance had devastated him. After that, the descent had been quick: alcohol, professional errors, bank divorce, dismissal, debts. He had lost everything: status, friends, home, and New York had swallowed him up in its icy anonymity. A few streets away, in the upscale neighborhood of Murray Hill, a man was gently closing the padded door of a private clinic. Impeccably dressed in a gray cashmere coat, his hair pulled back, his jaw set, Nathaniel Davenport seemed to be the living representation of success. CEO of Davenport and Locke Holdings, one of the most powerful investment funds on the East Coast, it was worth more than $2.3 billion. Yet that morning he was not thinking about the markets or the numbers. 3 weeks earlier, after a simple fainting spell at a gala, he had undergone a series of tests in the greatest secrecy. The diagnosis had come as a slap in the face: a rare liver tumor, aggressive but operable. The doctor had been direct but confident: if he acted quickly, the operation could prolong his life. So he had agreed. Since then, everything had accelerated. He had put several projects on hold. Written a 27-page will. Prepared the transition to his right-hand man. Organized his farewells without making them farewells. He didn't want to alarm anyone, especially not Abigail, her younger sister, nor Rachel, his loyal assistant for 20 years. He wanted to leave quietly, with the same icy dignity that he imposed in his board meetings. One cold morning, shortly after 11 o'clock, Nathaniel Davenport was leaving a business lunch at a low-key Fifth Avenue restaurant. A hypocritical meeting like so many others, where smiles were exchanged while talking about investments as if they were the weather. Nathaniel had barely touched his plate. His mind was elsewhere, fixated on the transaction scheduled in a few days. The sky was low, the wind biting. He turned up the collar of his cashmere coat and strode toward his chauffeur-driven car. He could have called the car to the door, but something inside him, perhaps a desire for solitude or a need to feel the asphalt beneath his feet, had driven him to walk a few blocks. As he passed an old brick building, his gaze was caught by a discreet movement at the corner of a wall. A man was crouching there, between 2 trash cans, wearing a torn coat, a cap pulled down over his eyes, muttering words in a barely audible whisper. Nathaniel didn't slow down. He'd seen hundreds like him. Too many. Forgotten shadows on the city's sidewalks. But as he walked away, the whispers took shape. And suddenly, one sentence stood out from the rest like a blade slipping from its sheath. "Don't go. The doctor will kill you. You're not sick." Nathaniel froze. Tension shot through his spine like an electric shock. He turned around slowly. The man hadn't called his name. And yet, that sentence, it was addressed to his. Has what he lived in secret. To what no one knew. He approached slowly. "What did you just say?" The man raised his head, very slowly, as if the effort was costing him. His eyes, hidden beneath thick eyebrows and ancient grime, shone with a strange glow. It wasn't the unfocused gaze of a drug addict or a madman. It was the gaze of a man lucid, haunted, aware of the seriousness of his words. "I know it sounds crazy," he said in a hoarse, but surprisingly steady voice. But I heard things. Late one night. People were talking. They said you thought you were sick. That you were rich, influential, and that you were going to be operated on. But that, it was a trap. If you climb onto that table, you'll never wake up. Nathaniel felt his heart pound. How could this stranger know who was he? Was it a coincidence? A hallucination of the mind? A scam? But something about this man, his naked sincerity, his cracked but straight voice, her innocent look, unsettled him. Why are you telling me this? Because I've seen too many people die in silence. And I did nothing. This time. I won't keep quiet. Even if you think I'm crazy. Even if you leave. Caleb looked away, as if to protect himself from further humiliation. Nathaniel stood there for a moment, frozen between fear, doubt, and a deep, visceral intuition that he must not ignore this warning. He finally whispered, more to himself than to Caleb. What if you were right? Intrigued. Troubled. Shaken to the core. Nathaniel Davenport had gone home that night without saying a word. Not to his driver, not to his housekeeper, not to Rachel, his assistant who was still emailing him past 11 p.m. For the first time in years, he turned off his phone, slowly undid his tie, and stood alone in the icy silence of his penthouse overlooking Central Park. He stared at his reflection in the bay windows, his face projected into the darkness. The face that so many magazines had called the embodiment of quiet capitalism. A face that evening, seemed stranger. How could this stranger, this man broken by the street, know? Nathaniel replayed the words over and over, the doctor will kill you. You're not sick. They resonated in him like an ancient warning, like a voice from a place where truth is naked, without costume or medical jargon. And the more he thought about it, the more the doubts buried for 3 weeks resurfaced, lack of symptoms. The strange timing of the diagnosis. The insistent, almost rushed, way in which Dr. Vance had scheduled the procedure that it was as if a veil, hitherto invisible, was slowly being torn away before him. He made a radical decision. Without telling anyone, he contacted a private medical practice in Boston, whom he knew for his absolute discretion. He demanded full examinations, but specifically requested that no New York doctors be contacted, no records transferred, no names disclosed. Even under a pseudonym, his face was too well known. He discreetly rented a private residence near Cambridge and drove there alone the next morning. The tests lasted 2 days. MRIs, biopsies, advanced blood tests. A team of top-notch specialists, without preconceived notions, treated him like a regular patient. Then came the wait. 4 days. 4 days of silent anguish, of sleepless nights, wandering around this empty house where he felt for the first time in his life the fear of ignorance. Finally, one morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, the phone rang. Mr. Davenport? Yes. We have the final results. And there is no tumor. No trace of cancer. Your organs are healthy. Your previous checkups appear to have been seriously impaired. A silence. Immense. Violent. Like a slap from within. Nathaniel didn't answer right away. He sat down, panting. The words he had just heard echoed in his head like a brutal revelation. Not only was he not sick, more he was made to believe that he was. What if Caleb hadn't said anything? What if he had climbed onto that operating table? What would have happened to him under general anesthesia? An icy wave rose within him. He stood up slowly, phone still in hand. He felt betrayed. Manipulated. Trapped. And beneath the shock, another, deeper emotion rose within him, a stifled but powerful flame. Rage. Stunned, Nathaniel searched. Medical certainty had just been established, he was not ill. But the crucial question was no longer medical, it was criminal. Who had an interest in making him believe in a deadly tumor? Who had orchestrated this morbid illusion with such cold blood? Nathaniel could not be satisfied with mere doubt. He engaged Thomas Acker, a renowned private investigator, former FBI analyst, specializing in high-level fraud cases. A discreet, methodical, and incorruptible man. "I want to know everything we can find out about Dr. Robert Vance," said Nathaniel dryly, "that I must not miss anything. See if there are any deaths, any financial connections, any suspicious movements. Do it quickly, but do it properly." 48 hours later, Acker arrived at Nathaniel's temporary apartment with a file so thick it required a stiff folder. He placed the sheets on the solid wooden table and sat down opposite him, his gaze grave. "What I'm about to tell you will make your blood run cold." And he began. The Dr. Robert Vance, a star surgeon among New York's elite, enjoyed a reputation for excellence. A medalist and a guest speaker at international conferences, he was also untouchable. But in the shadow of his successes, Acker had gotten his hands on two cases that had been closed strangely quickly. Two patients, both elderly, wealthy businessmen, diagnosed with rare diseases, operated on by Vance, and both dead on the operating table. In both cases, post-operative reports were locked. The families were compensated by insurance companies to the tune of several tens of millions of dollars. And most importantly, in both cases, Vance was the secondary beneficiary from a medical research fund mysteriously linked to the victims' defunct companies. Nathaniel felt his throat tighten. But Acker didn't stop there. "There are worse things," he continued. "Vincent Hawthorne's name appears in cross-dealings with Vance. Wire transfers, shares in a shell company based in Delaware. I cross-referenced the data with your holding company's corporate files. And here's what I found." Acker opened another file. Vincent Hawthorne, former director of operations of the holding company Davenport and Locke, had been ejected by Nathaniel 6 months earlier after an internal audit revealed irregularities. Falsified amounts, hidden commissions, bribes to secure certain contracts. Nathaniel, implacable, had demanded his immediate and quiet departure, to preserve the company's public image. But Vincent did not leave empty-handed. He had kept internal access, confidential network connections, and maintained underground relationships with some members of the company still in office. Among them, the IT specialist responsible for medical data security. It was through this that he was able to get hold of Nathaniel's private exams, falsify them, submit them to Vance, and make people believe in an illness. And the most chilling. A payment date had already been scheduled on an account in Singapore. 24 hours after Nathaniel's scheduled surgery date. Amount, $25 million. A heavy silence fell. It was all there. The plan. The accomplices. The mobile. The method. A shiver of horror ran down Nathaniel's spine. He had never imagined that power, in the wrong hands, could become such a cold, calculated weapon. His death was planned like a financial operation. It was not a mistake. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a disguised execution, thought by a man he had once considered his protégé. Nathaniel stood up, stared out the window at the city lights, and whispered. They wanted to kill the man, to steal the empire. And now he was going to make them understand that the man was not dead. That he was standing. And that he was preparing to retaliate. The next morning, while the city was already buzzing with the frantic cadence of horns, pressing heels and scalding hot coffee, Nathaniel Davenport returned to the Bryant Park, his long coat floating behind him like a train of silence. He'd spent a sleepless night. Not because of the cold, but because of the inner turmoil. The evidence was irrefutable. The plot, the betrayal, the death trap, all of it swirled around in his head like poison he couldn't stomach. But this morning, he didn't come for revenge. He came thank. Caleb was there, in the same place. Sitting cross-legged on the half-icy bench, wrapped in his threadbare blanket, he stared at a puddle of water reflecting a patch of gray sky. He didn't even see Nathaniel arrive. The latter sat down slowly beside him, without a word. For a moment, they were just two silent men on a bench, in a city that no longer listens to anyone. Then Nathaniel spoke, in a low, almost broken voice. You knew. You saved me. Caleb slowly turned his head. His face was marked by fatigue, by nights without shelter, by winters without warmth. But in his eyes, there was light. Not arrogance, nor pride, just the clarity of a man who did what was necessary, without expecting anything. He nodded slowly. I recognized you from the newspaper. Your face. I'd seen it dozens of times before, on the covers, on screens. I knew you were important. But what I heard that night, it wasn't business. It was an execution. Nathaniel stared at him, his brow furrowed. Caleb took a deep breath, as if he were letting out a truth he had kept inside for too long. I was going through the trash behind the Fairfax Hotel, you know, the one near Lexington. It was cold. I heard a voice. It was Vincent Hawthorne. He was talking on the phone, he was even laughing. He said, "Everything is ready. Davenport will sign himself out in the operating room." I made a mental note of it. Not to save you. I was just curious. But when I saw your face in that newspaper a few days later, talking about a battle against the disease, then I understood. I understood it was you. That you were the target. Nathaniel stood there for a moment, struck by the strangeness of the scene. A homeless man. A man whom society no longer even looks at. And yet, he was the one who heard, saw, understood. He was the one who spoke. After a long silence, Nathaniel whispered. I owe you my life, Caleb. Literally. If you hadn't spoken to me that day, I wouldn't be sitting here. He stared at him with grave intensity. Come with me. I want to help you. You deserve better than cold and oblivion. You saved a man, Caleb. And not just any man. I owe it to you. But Caleb shook his head gently. I don't want a debt. I didn't do this for a warm place. I don't want pictures. No medals. I just want. He hesitated, then looked down. Just a bed. A door that closes. And a coffee, a real one. Without anyone looking at me strangely. Without anyone asking me what I did to end up here. Just a little peace. Nathaniel felt a surge of emotion rise. Not pity. Respect. He stood up, placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder, and answered, looking straight ahead. You'll have all that, Caleb. And much more. Because peace isn't a gift. It's a right. And you've earned it. A year had passed. The seasons had turned, but for Caleb Hayes, it was more than just a cycle of time, it was a rebirth. He now lived in Asmal, bright apartment in Harlem, a stone's throw from a community center he ran with calm and kindness. The address wasn't luxurious, but it smelled of hot coffee in the morning, restored dignity, and the laughter of the children he passed in the elevator. Sober for 312 days, he kept a photo of his wife Mira on the bedside table, next to a notebook in which he wrote down 3 things he was grateful for each day. His gaze had changed. He no longer avoided stares. He smiled more often, a quiet but genuine smile, forged in the ashes of his fall. Thanks to the support of the Davenport Foundation, he had designed and piloted Amelis rehabilitation program named Second Voice, a name he had chosen himself, in memory of that night when his own voice, long ignored, had saved a life. Every week, he gave lectures at shelters. He spoke without pathos, without embellishment. He simply said, I wasn't saved by a miracle. I was saved because, for once, someone listened to what a broken man had to say. And this message was touching. For it did not come from a perfect man, but from a man returned from oblivion. For his part, Nathaniel Davenport had taken back control of his business empire. But something inside him had changed. Less coldness in his gaze. Fewer crushing certainties, more humanity. After assembling a team of lawyers, investigative journalists and former investigators, he organized a press conference in the heart of Manhattan. The evidence against Vincent Hawthorne and Dr. Vance had been rigorously exposed. The recordings, the transfers, the falsified diagnoses, everything was there. The affair had exploded like a bomb. The medical world was rocked by the scandal. Ethics commissions were established in several states. Vance lost his license and was subsequently prosecuted. Vincent, meanwhile, was charged with attempted aggravated homicide, fraud, and money laundering that he pleaded guilty to avoid a long and humiliating trial, but his career was shattered. Nathaniel, far from being satisfied with their fall, had turned to something else, the repair. He had created, under the banner of the Davenport Foundation, a network of initiatives combining health, social rehabilitation, and ethical monitoring in private medical circles. His empire was still powerful, but now, he served something greater than himself. In his 47th floor office, with its panoramic view of Central Park, he always kept a framed black and white photo on an inconspicuous shelf, a shot of Caleb, sitting on a bench, looking up at the sky. And sometimes, between two meetings, he would stop, stare at the horizon, and say in a low voice to his colleagues, "Sometimes it's not the doctor who saves you, but the one that society refuses to even look at." And no one answered. Because they knew. Because they had seen the story. Because in a world that moves too fast, someone had taken the time to listen to a whisper coming from the sidewalk.